everybody. Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me, as always, are my fabulous co-hosts who aren't quite ready. Champing the bit.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
Champing the bit to be introduced.
Hi, Rob, it's Jackie.
Hi, everyone.
Rob is just waiting for someone to tell him that it's chomping at the bit.
Guys, nipping in the butt.
No,
That's also not right.
No. But
is this the podcast about Rob's pet peeves? Grammatically?
No, Diana, it's a podcast about correct grammar.
No, it's not.
It's not a personal preference. No, it's neither of those. It's a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research. Every week we pick a topic and we find some relevant journal articles and then discuss them, sort of like an old-fashioned journal club. And this week is no exception. I guess the only exception being that rather than just us three cool people, we have a fourth cool person on the line to discuss this week's topic, interview skills.
Ooh, neato.
Yes. So while many of us out there listening might not be in the market for a job that requires us to remember how to do our interview skills, there is a huge swath of students who will be graduating from school pretty soon, whether college or high school, who are going to be entering the job field. Many of these individuals will struggle with applying for jobs, both in the application and then also in the job interview, the dreaded job interview. And many of these individuals will also have a disability, either an intellectual disability or an autism spectrum disorder, which is already a population, I think, that is severely underrepresented in the job market today. I mean, I think the statistics are pretty frustrating to hear that if you have a diagnosis of autism, then you have a much higher percentage chance of being underemployed or unemployed. And possibly that could be because job interview skills can be challenging for individuals who have disabilities related to their social skills.
Yeah, which may not actually be related to whether you can do the job at all.
No, many times they are not.
Yeah.
But that's just still how most jobs are. You have a job interview, you sit down, you meet with somebody, and if they don't like you in the job interview, it does not matter that you can do the job. You don't make it past that first round.
And it's really intimidating. Job interviews are no fun for anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Except for me, I actually love job interviews.
To give them or to get them?
Both.
Oh, I don't mind. I don't mind
love
doing
going.
a job interview.
I know. I love going because like, what are your strengths? I'm like, I have so many strengths. What are your weaknesses? I care too much.
Just work too hard.
My lack of weaknesses is my main weakness.
I mean, I have no weaknesses.
What can I say?
I'm not that strong. I can't lift like a car or something, and it would be great if I could, but...
I'm trying to run an ultra marathon times 5, but I only can run an ultra marathon times 4. Anyway.
I'm trying to think of something, but just nothing's coming to mind.
So we have on the line a very special guest who will be talking to us about research that she has done in this area, as well as some articles that she recommended for some good background material. So before I introduce our special guest, let's talk about the articles that we'll be discussing tonight. They are Improving the Interview Skills of College Students Using Behavioral Skills Training by Stocco, Thompson, Hart, and Soriano from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, 2017. Then we'll be discussing Virtual Reality Job Interview Training in Adults with Autism Spectrum Disorder by Smith, Ginger, Wright, Taylor, Hum, Olson, Bell, and Fleming. And that is in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, 2014. Computerized Behavioral Skills Training with Selection-Based Instruction and Lag Reinforcement Schedules for Responses to Interview Questions by O'Neill and Rehfeldt. And that's in Behavior Analysis, Research and Practice, 2017. And then finally, and this will give you a hint as to who our special guest is, Rosales and Whitlow, a component analysis of job interview training for young adults with autism spectrum disorder in Behavioral Interventions, 2019. And without any further ado, our very special guest, Dr. Rocio Rosales, the primary author on that last study. Rocio, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Oh, very good. Well, it is always exciting to talk about, I think, any topic related to preparing individuals for life after school, and interview skills is definitely one of those topics. Before we get into interview skills itself and the background research and your research, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay, sure. So I received my doctorate from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, and Jackie had an overlap there with me, home of the Salukis. That's where I met her.
It was so fun.
So it was very fun. Yes. One of the best years of my life. So right after graduating with my PhD, I went straight into a teaching position at Youngstown State University, and that's in Northeast Ohio. And I worked there for 4 years before accepting a job to move to New England in 2013 to join the Department of Psychology at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, which is where I work now. And I'm an associate professor and coordinator of our Master of Science in Autism Studies there. And we're actually getting ready to graduate our 6th cohort of students this spring. So that's really exciting. That
Good work.
Yeah.
How did you get interested in this topic specifically?
So this topic, I think actually like all projects that I've collaborated on with graduate students, the original idea was the students. So Helena Whitlow, who's the co-author on the manuscript that was recently published in Behavioral Interventions. So this was Helena's thesis, and at the time that she was starting to conceptualize the idea, she had been working primarily with very young and also school-age children with autism, but was really interested in gaining experience working directly with young adults with autism to diversify her experience during the time that she was a graduate student. And she ended up doing a few different literature reviews, I think, before narrowing down her topic to actually teaching interviewing skills. And at the time that she started to work on the project, I think it was probably back in 2016, there weren't very many published studies in behavior analysis anyway on this topic. Mm-hmm. So there's a handful of studies from the late 70s and 80s that demonstrated using behavioral skills training, but those studies had, I think, recruited a different demographic than the participants that she was really interested in working with.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's several papers that have recently been published on the topic, as you know, and I sent you a few of those along with the paper that we published.
Mm-hmm.
That's topic.
Yeah, that's actually so cool, though. And I also like to highlight that she started it in 2016, and it is now 2019. Yes. I think that's always good for people listening to know. That's actually really
great. That's like a really good timeline.
Yeah, but people are like, wow, that's long, but it's actually great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So go her and you.
Thank you. Yeah, she worked really hard on it. So, yeah, and very diligent in getting the manuscript out for review and all that. So
I feel like this is one of those topics where you would say, oh, that would be so fun. Let's do interview skills. And then as you start to unpack what it actually means to try to quantify interview skills, you maybe start to regret
oh, goodness. Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And like I said, not only doing the lit review, but then thinking about what is going to be our dependent variable and how are we going to operationally define that? And what is that going to actually look like? How are we going to measure it? Are we, really looking at this? And even just also even the training component, which was a process to figure out what is it that we're actually going to be doing here. But I think that's part of the fun of research too. So it goes hand in hand, I guess.
I only do research if there is no bumps in the road. That's me. No, just kidding.
And it's done within 6 months.
That's right.
From conceptualization
always
to submitting.
So when we talk about job skills, what exactly are we talking about? Because I'm thinking of, wear a nice suit, keep your resume down to 1 page, firm handshake, probably smiling involved. But what were the common, key job skills that the literature interview skills, sorry. What are the common ones? Because even in the articles, it seemed like there was some variability as to what was considered an important skill.
Yeah, so I think some of the common dependent variables that came up in the literature were definitely more nonverbal behavior. So things like having an appropriate greeting and closing and, the firm handshake and the amount of eye contact and smiling that you do during the interview, which, can vary, how quickly you're responding to the question, the number of fillers that you have, so how many uhs and likes are there. I think one article that is referenced quite a bit in, I think, most of the behavior analytic studies on this topic is an article that was published back in 1977 by Hollinsworth and colleagues that started to identify that, those nonverbal behaviors are definitely important to evaluate, but what might be actually more important is how you're responding to those interview questions that you're asked. So you can go in and have a really good posture and firm handshake, but if you are not prepared to answer the questions that you're being asked and do it in a way that makes you seem like you're going to be a good match for the company, a good candidate, basically selling yourself, then you may not get the job. So we really need to start looking at the dependent variables responses to interview questions even more so than those nonverbal behaviors. And that's where I think the studies that I sent you I think that's part of what they really started to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
I love that so much because I feel like that is like really of the moment in a good way, because we want to be, currently thinking about not just fitting the behavior of someone to a particular form, but thinking about what the function of that behavior really is going to be, right? So it's like job interview skills are sort of their own class of behavior here, and they may or may not reflect accurately on how well that person's going to be able to perform the job. And if we're trying to parse that out for someone with autism, those may be two rarely separate categories of behavior, right? So part of that is also reflective of the interviewer as well, that they can see what's going to ultimately be most beneficial for the company and whether that person can fill the role, even if maybe pieces like eye contact or some stilted qualities are challenging in the interview, but wouldn't necessarily be in the real job performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think it's often the case, I think that, you can do really well in the interview too, kind of the flip side of this, but it may not be actually a very good indicator of how well you're going to perform, like you were saying, Diana.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I think with this topic specifically, job interviewing and interviewing skills and employability of individuals with autism, competitive employment, that is, and it's been getting a lot of attention in the media. So research and in the media, I think I've seen a lot of news stories recently that have been popping up talking about how it might be important to think about really diversifying how we're not only training people to be gainfully employed. So companies, for example, are doing things like hiring only individuals with autism that to really play up their strengths, or they're doing away with the traditional interview process. I've seen a couple of news articles on that. So, and maybe for this reason that you're, pointing out, that if the interview is not really going to be a good indicator of how good of an employee you are, then maybe we shouldn't even be bothering with the interview.
But you have to get to know a person somehow.
Right. So I think, and I didn't read this in detail, but I think what they're doing is just kind of bringing them on, still doing an interview, but it's an untraditional interview process. So they'll bring them on for like a day of shadowing or something like that, and then kind of see how they fit in. And I think also just a need to educate companies about the benefits of hiring individuals with autism. So just to say that there's, I think, a wide variety of things that we could be doing to address this issue. So definitely focusing on teaching interviewing skills, but then I think that's not the only thing that we can do to help.
Absolutely.
So looking at the research that you shared with us, that was either, I think, a part of your own research with Helena, there seemed to be some kind of common threads in terms of looking at a few skills, and then one of the key problems being, how do you teach a skill? It almost feels like a very soft skill that could have almost an unlimited number of results. It's not as simple as these are the 10 questions that you will always be asked. So you just have to know those 10 answers and you'll be fine. There's variability in how the question is asked. The way you answer it could change. You don't want to have the same answer for similar questions. You want to be able to come up with real world examples. And it seemed like some of the common parameters had to do with some amount of behavioral skills training. And then the other question, which I think was the more exciting question and the one that you were looking into, was how much can we use technology to speed up the process? Because just using BST seemed like it took forever. And that was with typically developing college students. It took, I think, it was upward, more than 10 hours, per student, at least in that study, or that was the high end of the range.
Right.
So when it came to looking at, say, Dr. Stocko's article on BST, was that an article that was part of the Lit Review while you were preparing for your own paper, or did that come out kind of simultaneously as your own work?
So I think she ended up incorporating aspects of it because it did get published, or I think we had a preprint. We must have had a preprint of it at some point as she was getting ready to start her data collection. One of the things that we ended up doing as the last phase in our study was this behavioral skills training session, and we didn't actually plan for that. So the reason we included that at the very end was twofold. One, it was an applied study. We really wanted the participants to go through and complete the training and actually meet our mastery criterion and leave the study with the skill set that we had intended for them to learn. And we had our mastery and failure criterion for when we would move on to the next component of the training package. And then once she started to run, I think probably the first 3 and started to see this may not actually get them up to where we really want them to be, because it was a pretty stringent mastery criterion that we set at 100%. Then we decided to, exactly. Then we decided to add the BSC, and it was because of this study that had come out and said, well, this is probably the way to go. And obviously behavioral skills training been demonstrated to be effective for a wide variety of different behaviors. So we were pretty confident that it would get us up to the criterion that we were looking for.
Mm-hmm. And then looking at the other articles, the review of the use of the lag schedule and the computerized behavioral skills training, and there was the virtual reality. Were those, again, components that just seemed like they would lend themselves to the study that your student was designing, or they were ones that just sort of inspired, let's look at some of the technologies out there?
Specifically with the virtual reality and then John O'Neill's computerized behavioral skills training, I think he actually has a couple other studies on this topic that were also either just being published or in press when she was starting to work on her lit review. And I have to say, we had reached out to him, and he was really gracious in sharing a lot of the materials that he had created for his project. And initially, we were going to use some of those materials because she had been looking at video modeling as a component of, can we just use video modeling to basically teach responses to interview questions? And so when she came across that study and we reached out to him, he had shared some of that information. And then as we started to dive into that, we were also wanting to involve our university career center in the process. And when she reached out to them, we realized that they actually had this software that they were using as part of their interview training for all students, all university students. So this interview stream, which is what we ended up evaluating, is a commercially available product, but it's being widely used in a lot of university campuses, including UMass Lowell. And in conversations that Helena had with the career counselor that we work closely with, they didn't really have a different approach to help or train college students with autism that were going to them if they did go to them. So we thought, well, it probably is important then to just kind of do this as a starting point, right? Let's see. So this is what we're doing. Mm-hmm. How effective is it? And if it's not, then we can kind of go from there. So that's kind of how we came upon interview stream as one of our primary independent variables for the study.
That's cool. Do you think that you'll go on to investigate whether interview stream is effective for the actual college students that are using it?
Yeah, that's definitely something that is on my to-do list.
Yeah, I mean, because you didn't say it worked, right? So I'm wondering, does it even work for anyone?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that we also designed the study. To be fair, we designed the study such that, we had this failure criteria, and it was really, after 2 sessions. And part of the reason that we did that was mostly because we were worried about attrition. The participants were coming in for multiple training sessions. We didn't compensate them other than, hey, you're going to learn this really cool skill that's probably going to benefit you. And everybody was really excited to come in and participate, but it was taking at least 75 minutes per session. So it was a lot of time.
That's a long session.
Yeah, that's long.
So there's a possibility that if we were to continue to evaluate just interview stream with either group, that, we would have seen maybe some more improvement. Mm-hmm. But there's, I think, definitely limitations to it.
I want to pause our interview real quick just to let you out there know that ABA Inside Track is ACE approved. By listening to this episode, you are eligible for 1 continuing education unit. Just go to our website, abainsidetrack.com/get-CEUs to find out more information. You are going to need 2 secret code words that we've hidden throughout this episode. I'm going to give you the first of those right now, and it's HIRED. 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 Like, I've gotten really good at my job interview skills, and then I got hired for a job. Hired. From looking at the research, you knew that behavioral skills training, well, actually, you knew that after the fact. That's really interesting to know. So eventually,
I must say, though, before you go on,
okay,
that is one of like the most heart-stopping moments is when you like have an ongoing research project and then you see a newly published study on like the exact same topic that you're researching, and you're like, oh no, is it the same study? Or did they do something better than I was thinking of? So, but luckily it all worked out. Okay, go ahead, Rob.
So you knew that there were lots of technologies that were sort of trying to be leveraged into use for teaching individuals with autism job interview skills. So you knew that there was some background information. You'd come to the conclusion that, well, we're using this for young students and we're in a college setting and we've got a software that we use. So I guess that's the one we're going to assess. So what were the big differences that you found between live stream, and then did you get a chance to try out other job interview training packages or really, sorry, not live stream, interview stream. Did you just, you just decided, you know what, that's what we have, so we should start there?
No, we did look at specifically at the virtual reality training, because that is actually freely, a trial anyway, is freely available online. So the Immersion LLC, that was the virtual reality training with Smith and colleagues. They have a couple of studies published on the topic.
With Molly Parton, or what was her name?
Yes, Molly Porter,
Parsons?
the trainer.
Porter.
You were thinking of Dolly Parton there.
You could buy that Dolly
that one
Parton
looks pretty
edition.
Cool, I have to say.
Yeah, that
so,
does look neat. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's real, and it's really comprehensive.
Yeah, so you could have 10,000 different types of interactions.
Sure. Yeah, so free trial online, but then there's a fee to purchase the software. And it's not that pricey, but again, given that we already had something at the university, that's why we ended up going with InterviewStream. So just kind of differences that I would note between this immersion and the InterviewStream is that I think that the virtual reality training, like I said, it is a little bit more comprehensive. Not only does it include the opportunity for users to practice answering the interview questions, but it has different levels that the user can go through, and that was part of the study that they published. So I think that probably makes it a little bit more naturalistic as well. So these simulated interviews have these difficulty levels where this trainer, Molly, the authors described her as being either friendly, business oriented, or brusque.
Yeah.
So easy, medium, hard levels. And
then they said that she'd even ask illegal questions.
I like that.
Yeah, what's an illegal question in a job interview?
Are
you married?
Do you have kids? Are you planning to get pregnant? When?
For how long?
What are you doing after this
Jackie
interview?
knows all of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Probably related. I would bet that it would probably also be related to disability too in this case, but I don't know.
Oh yeah. So am I right with this virtual reality one that the choices were all listed and they just selected them textually?
No, there was
right.
There was. I thought this one had a speech to text function. This one seemed very.
It does have
complex.
Yeah, it does have both. It has both. So it has similar to the O'Neill study. They have basically like a selection-based response where the Molly comes on, asks the question, and there's a list of options that the user can select, and you can just click on it, and then it would speak it for you. Or there is an option where you can actually speak the response and then, get some feedback. And the feedback that they give is a little interesting. So they have, I don't know if you all got a chance to check it out, but you all should check it out just because it's so I think it's kind of funny. somebody in the bottom corner that's giving some nonverbal feedback, like shaking their hands. If they're saying like, no, that's a bad.
I was wondering what she was.
That.
Yeah, because
I was wondering what she was doing too.
They've got Molly. She's looking all business up at the top. They've got like, the little chat transcript on the bottom. And then, there's the little lady in the pink shirt just sort of standing there.
Right. Or she gives like a thumbs up or claps if it's an appropriate or good response. And then so there's also, I think, a wide variety of response options. And so I think that basically it's like incorporating multiple exemplars, I think, into the training, which is good. So this study, I have to say, though, that one of the things that I thought was interesting and wasn't very prominent in their methodology, but I think it's important to point out is that they did end up adding a component of verbal feedback by the experimenter that ends up being really similar to our study and actually also the use of behavioral skills training. So if we're really wanting to evaluate just the use of computer-based training, then that verbal feedback by the experimenter following each session really needs to be omitted.
Right.
Yeah,
or isolated somehow.
I agree. I definitely.
If I'm paying for a big fancy software suite, and this sort of, whatever computer setup I need for the virtual reality piece, I would like to say, go into this room, keep whenever you want to, and by the end of the time, you are the best job interview ever, and I never have to say a word. You just go in and it's there. If I have to actually send someone in to work with you on it, well, geez, I could have done that to begin with. Why would I pay for all this other setup?
Right, but it might be less time overall.
No, I know. There are
it's such
extenuating
a nuanced
circumstances.
skill. Like, all of these aspects are so nuanced. I feel like you need that human feedback component. I mean, so far, that's what the literature has suggested.
Yeah, definitely.
But I haven't done an interview with Molly. Maybe I'll go try it out.
Yeah, I haven't done an interview with Molly either.
She said it
fairly scary, though. I would
angry setting. You're not getting this job setting.
Angry eyes. Anyway.
Well, you'll only be able to get through it for like 5 minutes and then it'll cut you off and you have to pay for it. So just letting you know.
Good to know.
All right.
Yeah.
So we had the Molly, we had the computerized behavior skills training, and then you were looking at interview stream. So talk exactly about what interview stream is like, because I think you did a good job in the study, but again, it is very different, I think, to read about a piece of software than to actually use that piece of software.
Sure. Yeah. So with interview stream, the way it works is if you have access to the software, you can create a profile. And then once you have that profile, you're able to select the number of times that you want to practice an interview. And the nice thing about it is for our study, we were able to individualize the videos that we wanted to use. So Helena actually created videos for the specific questions that she wanted to include in her study instead of using the ones that were part of the software. And so that was a nice piece.
And did she make them herself, or did she try to make so she didn't try to like make the interview person any different than her? I like that.
No, so it was her.
Good for her.
The person that was doing the mock interviews, though, in our study was different. So it was a different person doing the mock interviews, but she was essentially the trainer.
Right.
So when you go into interview stream, you can record your interview. You can also have the option of pausing and restarting at any time. So we did place limits during the study on that, but if you're just using it on your own, there's no limits on how many times you can pause and restart. And then at the end of the interview, you have the option of watching yourself. So there's a self-feedback component there. So you can watch yourself, rate your performance on...
So hard.
Yeah. So,
like, I did horrible.
I know. I'm never going to listen to this podcast for that reason. I don't want to listen to myself talk. So, and there's a self-evaluation form that they created for that as well. And so they can watch themselves. And then the other thing that's nice about it is that they can save the video and share it with somebody else who can also provide feedback to them. So the way that I think it typically works at university settings is that students basically create a profile, get access to it, and then they can opt to share it with a career counselor, for example, who then would provide them with feedback on how they're doing. But then they can also go in and do some live mock interviews with the career counselor as a follow-up. But, obviously it's all up to them how they want to individualize their training. There are also in Interview Stream, there's also some video models of some of the most commonly asked interview questions. And there's somebody on there answering the question. It's like 30 seconds to a minute long for each question. So for 3 of the 6 participants in our study, we did add that component just to see if there'd be any differences. They had that brief video model as part of the interview stream, but didn't see a difference.
Okay.
You record, you watch yourself, you basically rate your performance, and then you can send it, share it with others. And then they have some other resources as part of the interview stream package or the software. So there's, these PDF documents on things like limiting the use of and like when you're responding, having an elevator pitch for, what you're wanting to do, who you are, and things like that.
So it's just practice. It's just an opportunity to practice in like a more formal setting, basically.
Right. Yeah. And I guess the idea is that you can do it from the comfort of your own home. They even have like a mobile app, so you can do it anywhere, you want.
While you drive, practice. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. When people are practicing responses
to interview questions. That's when I rehearse everything is while I'm driving. That's my verbal rehearsal time.
So I have a quick question, and maybe I missed it in the article, is your students or your participants came into a session, so they came to the session to do it. Did they have access to the live stream outside of the session? So they could be like in their pajamas? Okay, just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah.
I didn't find that anywhere, but that makes sense, right? So they're not like double practicing, like when I get home, I'm going to put my pajamas on and live and interview stream.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And so the way we did it was that we created a separate profile for them. And actually for this study, we ended up recruiting participants primarily from a networking group that one of my colleagues, Ashley Hillier at UMass Lowell runs. And so I believe only one of the 6 or maybe none of them were actually UMass Lowell college students. So they were community members that came in. So they wouldn't have had access anyway.
Okay. That makes sense.
All right. Let's stop a moment, take a little break. We'll be right back with more with Dr. Rosales.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
And we're back talking about job interview skills with Dr. Rocio Rosales. And let's continue that conversation now. So you have your participants, you know you're using Interview Stream. Whether it was you or Helena or both, I really loved how you set up your procedure. It was like this great kind of stepwise, we're going to try this, and then if that doesn't work, we'll have this, and nice, very stringent criteria for moving between the different, not exactly phases, but the different types of training that were going to be provided. Could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you laid it out really nicely in figure 1, but for those folks who don't have the article right in front of them and who can't see how well it was broken down there.
You're so good at this, by the way, Rocio. I always encourage people to read your articles because they're so clear in your
There's always a flow
like
chart.
your procedures, and you always know what's going on, and that's so helpful for graduate students and for myself. So way to rock it.
This definitely, I want to second that. It definitely is a great article in that it both was very, sound methodologically, and then also told a story, which for me, I'd prefer to read an article that tells me a little story about a research. When it's just too many numbers, I get very like, I don't know what you're trying to tell me. Forget it. I'll wait for the conference talk you give. I can't follow it. So this is very nice.
Well, thank you. I have to say the flowchart idea is something that was encouraged from even when I remember doing my dissertation work, that, we're like, flowcharts are, they're a really good way to kind of guide people through what you're doing. And then, so I've just kind of incorporated them to a lot of the studies that I've done. So as far as the procedure, before they came in for their first training session, we did give them what we called an interview training packet. And basically what that was a slightly modified version of what's online, freely available to everybody at the university website through the Career Center on how to prepare for a job interview. So it includes things like, how to dress and how to greet, and you should have a practice your handshake and the types of questions that you might get asked. And it did actually include most or all of the questions that we were going to ask. So we wanted to give them that document because we anticipated that the participants would probably be coming in with some idea of what they thought that they should or shouldn't be doing. Or there was also some variability in their experience in both previous trainings that they may have had and or going on job interviews. So we wanted to try to kind of make that consistent for all the participants before they started and before we did baseline. So that was pre-training. And so prior to their first mock interview, they had that written instruction and they had access to it for about a week before they came in. And we did the mock interviews. And then since this was a multiple probe design across participants, we ended up introducing the interview stream component. We staggered that across 2 different baselines.
Yeah.
For participants 1 through 3 and then 4 through 6. So they got exposed to the interview stream, and then as part of the interview stream package, they were evaluating their performance. So they were watching themselves immediately after they videotaped the interview. And this was all done in a lab setting at the university. So they would come in and we have a nice setup where, they can just set up at a computer, gave them instructions on how to start the interview stream program. And Helena had made it so that it was, they just basically hit start and it was all kind of pretty straightforward. There weren't really any questions about how to proceed. For each question, they had up to 5 minutes to respond. So they also had the option of just hitting forward or advance or stop recording. I forget what the button actually said, but once they finished responding to the question, they, would hit stop the recording to advance to the next question until they got to the end of the interview. And then once they finished the interview, we asked them to watch themselves and rate themselves. So that was kind of the self-eval. Yeah. And so we only did that. So we had a criterion of, I think it was, if they didn't have 2 additional correct responses over 2 in the next 2 sessions, then they would then advance to the next component, which was in addition to all of that, go in, record their interview, and then the experimenter would come in and she would watch the video with them. So she would start the recording, and then after each question, she would pause it and give some constructive feedback, things that they did well, things that they needed to improve on, things that they could improve on for the next time. And so we did that again. We had a criterion for advancing. If they hadn't met our criterion after 2 consecutive sessions of that, then we would move on to the behavioral skills training. So the behavioral skills training session, important to note that we only focused on teaching or practicing responses to the questions that they had not yet mastered. So we weren't spending time, if they had, questions 3, 4, and 5 down, but we're really struggling with responding to a question like, tell me about yourself, then that was the one that we were going to really focus on for the behavioral skills training.
That makes sense. And did you see a huge difference from just using the interview stream to the verbal feedback, or did everyone have to go through behavioral skills training? I think everyone had to go, right?
Yeah, everybody had to go through the BST. Yeah, but there was definitely improvement with the verbal feedback. Definitely a change in, I mean, just from looking at the data, like change in the level of performance. But, and again, you know, I think if we hadn't set up that criterion, we want them to get 100%. And this was Helena. This was actually all Helena. She's like, no, I want them to learn how to respond to all the questions in my project before I let them go. I feel really strongly about this. I'm like, okay, it's your project. You're going to have to keep running those sessions. And she was all for it though. So she worked really, like I said, really hard on the project. And so she met with them and did the training. And then once they met the criterion, we then had them do the generalization probe. So that was at the Career Center. So it was a different setting. And then with a counselor that they had no prior experience with. So we were really lucky to be able to collaborate with our career services at UMessel to have that experience for them. And then the follow-up, we brought them back into the lab to see how well their skills had maintained.
Looks good. Spoiler. Yeah. It looks really good.
Yeah, overall, most of them maintained the skills. And then I feel like the generalization probes data were a little bit more variable, but that's real life.
That is real life.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly it was a new interviewer who might have presented the questions differently, or maybe it really felt more real, you know, so maybe they were nervous.
Sure.
But still responding increase from the pre-mock
definitely.
interview, so that's amazing.
Oh my gosh. Huge changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one of the other questions would be, you know, talking about that stringent criterion for considering mastery to have been met, you know, is there any answer out there as to what is the appropriate range of decent interview skill responding to still be considered hireable by a business?
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you really need to you got to hit those questions 100%, or, you know, 70 to 80% decent answers? That's not going to rule you out of the job pool. And because that would be the important piece to know, because if certainly like most people doing interviews don't care if you only get half the questions right, well, great, interview stream seems like it's all you need. But if it's they need 100% or they throw you out of the applicant pool, then interview stream wouldn't have been, at least in these participants, would not have been sufficient to have them arrive at the mastery criterion they needed to be at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, that leads me to, you know, one of the things that I think is important to remember, and that this isn't necessary for everybody, right? And it's also not necessarily like the only way to conduct training. And certainly, you know, again, for these criteria that we came up with, we tried to make it so that it was very as objective as we could make it without making a script for them to respond to the question. So
I'm glad you didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we did.
That's a big strength of the research, is because life isn't a script, right? So
right, yeah, exactly. So we, you know, incorporated some variability by just saying, you know, as long as they had something in there about 2 of those 3 criteria for each of the 5 questions that we were asking, they were scored correctly. And then unless, of course, if they did say something that we identified as being potentially something that would be inaccurate, then they were automatically scored as inaccurate, but then they were getting feedback on that. But yeah, I think to your point, Rob, thinking about what's going to work for whom and when and why it works for some and not others, and certainly, you know, what are employers looking for and what type of job are you applying for? So it is really, I think, a complex area to try to pinpoint everything, and there's a lot that can still be done.
Mm-hmm. If you had this study to do again, or you were going to do a similar, you know, kind of extension follow-up, what do you think you would add, or would it kind of been the same?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, quite a few things. There's questions that come up while we're doing the study, and then things that we want to do, and a couple things that we're doing now. I think one thing that is important that we're trying to evaluate now in the study that I'm running currently is, so we had one variation of each question during the training, but I think it's going to be important to try to come up with even more exemplars for each question. Yes. So asking the same question in slightly different way. So the study that we have going on now is we have at least 3 different exemplars for each question. And then we're also asking the questions in varied format, or in the study that was published that we've been talking about, we actually asked the questions in the same order, even though they were worded slightly differently at times. So just asking them in slightly different order. And then also just looking at just this behavioral skills training, it's a powerful teaching technology, and although it is really time intensive, or it can be time intensive, it's low cost. So I think if we can see that this is something that can be effective on its own, it'd be interesting to just figure that out and then maybe do a comparison of something like Interview Stream and BST. And if they're about the same, or one ends up still getting better results, then trying to figure out, well, how can we make behavioral skills training more efficient? And I mean, that's where the technology comes in, right? But I think there's sometimes issues with technology. So there are other ways to make the behavioral skills training less time intensive. So you could do like group BSD, or you can train the trainer to, not have just one person implementing the training for
do, like,
the individuals
or something. Yeah.
That would be fun. That would actually be great. It could be like a work study program, right? Where students could get employed for teaching interview skills. Oh, that would be cool.
Can I allude to a film that potentially no one has seen, and this illusion will fall on?
Yes,
of course, always.
I hope I've seen it, because
has anyone seen the film? I think you have, because I think we saw it together. Up in the Air with George Clooney.
Nope, I never see any movies.
Oh yes, I have.
Okay,
I have seen it.
Let's see, you've seen it. I'm sort of imagining like a combination of the VR simulation with the system for firing people that Anna Kendrick had put in place, where it's like, I'm sitting in the bunker, and like my job is to sort of like spin around to different monitors to give people feedback on their job interview performance training skills. Something that combines some of the scripts of the virtual reality with, a little bit more verbal feedback to really ensure that you're getting those high quality results, something like that. So kind of what I'm thinking.
Now I have to watch the film again.
I remember quite liking it. I thought George Clooney was great. Unrelated to anything here.
Put that above everything else on your to-do list.
Right, yeah.
Get the whole research lab
tonight.
together.
I'm going to watch it tonight
night.
after I get off.
He might have been nominated for an award, I think. I thought that was a well-reviewed movie.
It is a good movie.
Not so much for the feedback and the video skills, but that's what I'm thinking of.
I do think there's something to getting feedback from a human on your human performance.
I think so too.
But if only robots used job interview skills, then they could use the robot system.
No, all robots do is tell you that there is a spill so that a human can come and pick it up.
It feels like some
Stop
of those...
and Shop 2019.
Have you guys ever gone online and looked at some of the machine learning kind of techniques that people use, where you sort of like, if you can plug in enough exemplars, the machine will sort of predict what you would put instead, and it usually comes up with kind of funny results, because it's kind of... Yes, that's
like
exactly what, like those scripts,
yeah, like the
sitcom scripts, but through machine learning. I feel like you could do this with machine learning, and you would get like bizarre job interview questions that aren't quite,
but not too bizarre.
It'd be like Twilight Zone job interview skills if you did that. But I think having the human element does seem to be a more beneficial component.
And I think that your operational definitions are laid out really lovely for all of the questions and what you're looking for. And I think that if you used anything but a person, they might miss some of those nuances, unfortunately. Right? But maybe not. I love those. I kind of want to give them to all of my students. I may actually take your operational definitions in this article and print them out and hand them out to my students.
Yeah, go for it.
I will. And I'll cite your name. I will.
Right, because a lot of this research is with college students, generally, not specifically those with autism diagnosis. And it's like half and half as far as what you've given us, Rocio.
Right, yeah.
Everyone needs help with this skill. It's really
absolutely
hard.
Right.
It's really hard to give a good interview. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the Stocko article, I think, is probably the only one that's looked at typically developing college students. The other studies we're focused on like also young adults, but with other disabilities, so like learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities. And then the virtual reality training was specifically with autism. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a skill that everybody could benefit from.
Now, Rocio, from your reading of the literature and the work you've done in this area, do the products out there for job interview skill training feel like they are geared towards any one specific group, or do they have components of, say, like universal design that anyone could at least partially benefit from them? Is there enough data to support any sort of hypothesis either way?
Well, I mean, I think for the treatment packages that have this virtual reality component, it really is like behavioral skills training. They have the components, I think, that are included are that you have lots of practice. Some of them require active participation. So it's not just that you're, sitting there watching something, that you actually have to speak or select a response. I think that the feedback that is being delivered, I think that seems to be pretty consistent, whether it's from somebody that's not saying anything, like the little person on the screen that's giving you a thumbs up, or some other form of feedback. And then I think probably the big piece also is because once you start to behave, you're going to make errors, right? So being able to detect those and correct those errors without adverse consequences. So you're, again, in the comfort of a training situation where you're not at risk of not getting the job yet. So I think that's probably the one thing that I think is really helpful, is that it is a safe learning environment. So yeah, I mean, I think probably it does incorporate some behavioral teaching strategies that could probably be beneficial to everybody. I think that the thing that I wonder is how likely is it that somebody's actually going to like sit there and do this and make it so that it's something that feels like you're actually practicing for the interview, unless you have somebody that's holding you accountable, right? So unless you have a way to like, okay, I'm going to record this, I'm going to send it to somebody and they're going to give me feedback on it. But that would be a question that I would have is this something that can be effective? And if it is effective, what types of learners are benefiting from it?
Mm-hmm. I don't think we even talked about this throughout our time, but did you all go to your career centers when you were getting out of college to look at, their trainings on how to write a resume or how to look for a job or any of that?
No. I think I read a WikiHow article on how to do an interview, perhaps.
It's like a TA, that's not bad.
I did not.
Yeah, I
didn't even know it existed.
I knew mine existed because it would live next door to my dorm, but I never walked in.
Yeah.
Did you walk by? Rob totally did.
I did. I was not a particularly good student, and I was not sure what my job life was going to be after I graduated. So I said, you know what? I should probably take this seriously. And I learned how to condense my resume to one page, which is really easy to do when you're, 22, 23. Right. And, I can't remember if they did anything on interview skills, though. I've always enjoyed talking to people, so I sort of assume that even if they did, that might have been one I skipped. Because I was like, I like talking to people. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Which I guess that makes me smile.
That's one of your strengths.
So, thank you. I'm smiling right now.
Me too. You're so good at smiling.
Unlike me, I don't have any strengths. No, just kidding. That's what you're not supposed to say.
I care
That would
too
be
much.
inaccurate.
That's right.
Inaccurate response.
That's pretty funny, Diana.
I feel like they always wanted you to practice asking for Thursday off. I feel like that came up in multiple articles. It was like one of the test conditions. Like, you have to know how to ask for Thursday off. An important skill.
What's happening on Thursday?
Your favorite show is on Thursday, so you have to be home to watch it. I don't know.
That was
when Friends came on.
At one point, it was must-see TV, but that was a long time ago. Well, that was because one of the components in some of the articles was asking something. How would you ask something kind of uncomfortable or ask for something that you needed? Which I guess makes sense, but all I remember from being a college student looking for a job was, I have nothing that is that pressing for me to do. I need a job real bad, so there's nothing extra I want. Like, please hire me. So I never bothered to learn how to ask for, I need this or I need that until much later on in my career.
I'm still learning how to ask for
It's still hard, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you could do
Rocio.
You need a booster session.
I need a booster session.
Yes.
I think it might be time for us to head out into dissemination station.
You ready? Let's go.
I am. Here we go. Made by Jackie's Mouth.
So, Rocio, I'm gonna do dissemination station a little bit differently. I'm gonna say that I am a college or university, and I'm hiring you as someone who is an expert in the field of job interview training. You know a lot about it here. What should I be looking for in purchasing my ultimate job interview skill software package? Or maybe should I even be looking into my job interview software package or just hiring more counselors? What would you say is, given what you know now, your hypothesis on what would be best for me to look for?
That was a hard question.
Good question, Rob.
I know.
Yeah, no.
I paid a lot of money for this answer, so
So I think that based on what we know so far with the studies that have looked at incorporating some form of computerized training, whether it's virtual reality or just putting BST and making it more automatic, that there could be benefits in doing that, because I think that we have to identify what works for whom. So that approach could be beneficial to some students, whether with or without disabilities. So not necessarily saying that we don't want to use any form of computerized training, but that alongside that, it would be important to evaluate when that doesn't work, right? So if the computerized training or the video feedback that the student is getting, and we have to also identify at what point it breaks down, and if the student isn't willing to come back and say, hey, I need more help, right? That's, figuring out a way to make sure that they have opportunities to come in and get some human interaction and that verbal feedback from somebody that's more immediate on the responses that they're giving. So I think that a combination of the two would probably be best. But again, I think that the first goal would be, let's try to see if we roll this out, who is this going to work for and where are things breaking down? Do an analysis, right? Of like, okay, or maybe there are certain questions that everybody struggles with. And those are the ones that we really want to be able to target one-on-one with somebody. And then also, I think that the program would definitely need to, if it is computerized, that it needs to have an opportunity for the student or the learner or the user to have lots and lots of practice, right? So that they, can have unlimited practice with this, and that they can also have an opportunity to look back at it and potentially get some feedback from somebody else. And then I guess the other piece we haven't really talked about that was incorporated in the study was this idea of self-confidence and how that plays a role in
I love that.
How you present during an interview, and also even if you're going to be likely to go out and look for another job if you didn't do so well in that first interview. So in the study that we ran, we did this self-confidence measure at baseline, and then following the very first mock interview, and then at follow-up. And we saw that their self-confidence did improve, but I think, it is a self-report, so there are always challenges with that, and the possibility that, participants are responding the way that we think that, or what they think we want them to say is always there, of course. So, but I mean, that's, I think, a component to think about as well.
Well, I think I got my money's worth, Rocio. Thank you so much.
You're hired.
Whew, yeah. You now are at Robb College for interview skill development.
That's the best college around.
And I did not get training on that.
Right. So. This is such an important area of research because the population of, now young adults with an ASD diagnosis is so underemployed for what many of them likely could be contributing to the job force, and many people want to have jobs and be employed, and there's a real dignity in work, and anything that we could do to help get people into those positions, I think is really, really worthwhile. So I love this area of research, and I hope more comes from it.
I'm glad you brought that up, Diana, because I think as behavior analysts, we've done quite a bit, and there's a lot that we have done for younger children. And I think, funding mechanisms are contributing to this disparity of the services that are being offered, of course. But the fact that there is this, it's like 500,000 teens, right? They're going to be aging out of school services over the next decade. And so I think that there's lots of opportunities for us to start, we're already a little behind or a lot behind. So start tackling this as much as a little behind. So yeah, definitely. And being gainfully employed is something that is beneficial for everybody, including young adults with autism.
Absolutely. Right. So keep doing the good work out there.
Shoot.
So, Rocio, thank you so very, very much for being on the show tonight. We really learned a lot about job interview skill. I'm having a hard time remembering the order those words go in training and the different varieties and sort of what the future of research might be holding. If individuals are reading your article and would like to reach out to ask you either questions about the research or more about this topic, is there a place that they can find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. My email at the university is my first name and last name with an underscore in between. So Rocio_Rosales@uml.edu.
Excellent. Well, Rocio, thank you so very much for your time again. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. Thank
you all so much.
Sorry to pause and jump in one more time, but I wanted to make sure you get that second secret code word before the episode ends. And it is Pebble. 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 You could have fruity pebble or chocolate pebble, or you could skip a
Fred and
pebble.
Wilma's daughter.
Yep. Technically, that's pebbles.
Pebble.
But pebble is the keyword. Pebble. Well, I hope you all had a great time listening as much as we had a great time. Thanks so very, very much to Dr. Rocio Rosales for taking the time to be on our show and tell us all about her research and to share those great articles with us. I also want to say thank you to you, Diana, and to you, Jackie, for being here tonight.
Thanks.
You look like you were going to say something and
I was.
Stared at me.
Because I like to stare at your face.
Thanks for our listeners. Everyone can follow us on a variety of social media platforms. You can email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments.
Yeah.
Thanks to Kyle Sturry for our music interstitial.
Thanks, Kyle. Can't wait to meet you.
Yeah.
And we'll see you back here next week for another full-length episode.
Oh, she sounded
You got the whole thing,
good.
except, Diana, you forgot that they could check us out at the website, abainsidetrack.com. And if they like this show, should probably think about subscribing to it on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find these posted on YouTube every week with closed captioning enabled.
I know pretty close.
You were pretty good. I know you give me a hard time because you say my plug voice is very different than my normal voice. So
it is.
Perhaps we should switch and let you do it with your actually very good normal speaking voice, sharing that factual information.
I was worried it was a little too Delilah.
No, it was. It was totally Delilah.
I don't know what that reference is.
Delilah.
You don't know Delilah?
Delilah?
It's a talk show on radio that you can listen to like adult rock.
Oh, okay.
Adult sensitive music.
Nope. No idea what you're talking about. But that's irrelevant because we did all our plugs.
Right,
and
anyway.
We hope you enjoyed it. And we hope you feel free to email us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com
He's
to
just
let
going to
us
say them
know
all again anyway.
any topics or any feedback you have for us. Nope, I'm done. That's it.
Bye.
That's it
Bye
for this
now.
week. We'll see everybody next time with another full-length episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.